The autumn rain lashed against the weathered walls of the old Ravens Point ranch like nature's own fury, unrelenting and merciless. In the forgotten shed at the edge of the property, Emma clutched a shivering border collie puppy to her chest, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover of her grandmother's Bible, the only two treasures she hadn't lost. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the shed door, boots crunched on gravel, and Emma's heart seized with fear. She'd run as far as she could go. There was nowhere left to hide. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The old shed door groaned open, sending a shaft of harsh lantern light across Emma's face. She squinted, pulling the puppy closer as a tall silhouette filled the doorway. The border collie whimpered, pressing against her chest as if trying to burrow beneath her skin. "Please," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the drumming rain. "We're not stealing anything. Just needed shelter for the night. We'll be gone by morning." The figure stepped forward, lantern raised. In its glow, Emma could make out a weathered face, hard lines etched by sun and time, piercing eyes that missed nothing. Not the mud caking her once decent boots, not the careful way she'd arranged the single-horse blanket she'd found to avoid disturbing anything else, not the fading bruise along her jawline she'd tried to hide by turning away. "This is private property," the man said, his voice low and steady as a river current. Not angry, just stating a fact. "I know," Emma acknowledged, already gathering her meager belongings, the small pack containing everything she had left in the world. "Like I said, we'll be gone." "We?" The man's gaze dropped to the black and white puppy trembling against her. Something in his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. "Just me and Scout," Emma explained, gently stroking the puppy's head. "Found him abandoned on the road about 3 days back. Couldn't leave him." The man stood silent for a long moment, rain dripping from his hat brim. Emma had known men like him before. Men of few words. Men who owned land. Men who made their own rules. She braced herself for the inevitable order to leave, mentally calculating how far she might make it before the storm worsened. "There's a storm coming," he said finally, surprising her. "A bad one." Emma nodded, standing up slowly, her muscles stiff from the cold. The puppy squirmed in her arms. "Got somewhere to go?" the man asked, his eyes assessing everything about her, the worn dress that had once been quality, the careful way she held herself despite exhaustion, the wedding ring she still wore though she had twisted it to hide the modest diamond. "Yes," Emma lied, the word automatic after so many months of half-truths. "Just a little further down the road." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. He shifted the lantern, illuminating more of the shed's interior, the neat way she'd arranged herself in the corner, disturbing as little as possible. His gaze lingered on the Bible beside her pack. "You always travel with scripture?" he asked, something unreadable in his tone. Emma's hand moved protectively toward the book. "It was my grandmother's." Lightning flashed, momentarily brightening the shed beyond the lantern's glow. In that instant, Emma caught a better glimpse of the man, broad-shouldered, dressed in practical ranching clothes, a face that had seen hardship but hadn't been hardened by it. There was strength there, but not cruelty. "I'm Gabe Morgan," he said. "This is my ranch." "Emma," she replied, offering only her first name. "And this is Scout." As if recognizing his name, the puppy lifted his head, ears perked forward, despite his fear. "That storm's about to break proper," Gabe said, glancing over his shoulder at the darkening sky. "Bunkhouse has an empty room. Better than a leaky shed." Emma hesitated, surprise warring with instinct. "I don't need charity." "Not offering any," Gabe replied evenly. "Just practical sense. Flash floods in these parts can be deadly." Before Emma could respond, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the small building. Scout yelped, burrowing deeper into her arms. The rain intensified, drumming against the shed roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. "Your call," Gabe said, turning toward the door. "But decide quick." Emma looked down at Scout, at his trusting eyes watching her for guidance. She had maybe $20 to her name, nowhere to go, and a storm that threatened to wash away what little security she'd found in this forgotten corner of Montana. "All right," she said quietly. "Just until the storm passes." Gabe nodded once, no triumph or pity in his expression, simply acceptance. He lifted the lantern higher. "Follow me, stay close. Ground gets treacherous when it's like this." Emma gathered her few belongings, tucking the Bible into her pack and securing Scout inside her jacket where he could stay warm and dry. Outside, the rain came down in sheets, instantly soaking through her threadbare coat. She followed Gabe's broad back, his sure footsteps leading through mud that threatened to pull the boots from her feet with each step. The ranch house loomed ahead, larger than it had appeared when she'd first spotted the property at dusk. A sprawling, single-story structure with a wide covered porch and warm light glowing from several windows. But Gabe didn't lead her there. Instead, they veered toward a smaller building set apart from the main house. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Bunkhouse," he explained over his shoulder. "Used to house ranch hands when my father ran more cattle. Just me and Hank now, and he stays in the main house." Emma struggled to keep up, her body aching with exhaustion. Scout whimpered inside her jacket, sensitive to her tension. The bunkhouse was simple but solid, a main room with a wood stove, table, and chairs, and several doors leading off to what Emma assumed were sleeping quarters. Gabe pushed open the furthest door, revealing a small room with a narrow bed, dresser, and chair. "Hasn't been used in a while, but it's clean," he said, placing the lantern on the dresser. "Bathrooms down the hall. Kitchen's stocked basic. Help yourself, but clean up after." Emma stood dripping on the threshold, clutching Scout, who had emerged from her jacket to inspect their new surroundings with cautious interest. "Why?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Gabe paused at the door. "Why? What?" "Why help us? You don't know me. I could be anyone." His eyes moved from her to Scout, who had ventured a few steps into the room, sniffing curiously. "My grandfather used to say you can judge a person by how animals respond to them," Gabe said. "That pup trusts you. Good enough for now." He nodded toward her soaked clothes. "There are some old shirts in the dresser. Better than catching pneumonia." With that, he left, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that seemed to punctuate the sudden silence. Emma stood motionless, water pooling around her boots, until Scout nudged her leg with his nose, bringing her back to the present. "Well," she whispered to the puppy, "I guess we got lucky for once." Scout wagged his tail tentatively, as if he wasn't quite convinced but was willing to hope. Emma shed her wet clothes, finding an oversized flannel shirt in the dresser that fell nearly to her knees. She toweled her hair dry with a rough but clean towel from the bathroom, then sat on the edge of the bed, Scout curled beside her. "Just for tonight," she promised herself aloud. "Just until the storm passes." But as the rain pounded against the roof and wind howled around the corners of the building, Emma felt the bone-deep weariness of months on the run catching up with her. She pulled the quilt over herself and Scout, her hand resting protectively on the puppy's warm body as exhaustion claimed her. Morning arrived with startling brightness, sunlight streaming through windows that had been battered by rain the night before. For a moment, Emma was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her sleep-fogged mind. Then Scout stirred beside her, stretching and yawning, and memory returned. The storm, the shed, the quiet rancher who'd offered shelter. Emma dressed quickly in her own clothes, now dry though still stained with the evidence of her journey. She made the bed with military precision, erasing any sign of her presence. Scout followed at her heels as she ventured into the main room of the bunkhouse. The smell of coffee greeted her, a pot simmering on the wood stove that someone had lit while she slept. A loaf of bread sat on the table beside a jar of preserves, a knife, and a single plate. Emma hesitated, hunger warring with pride. The door opened, and Gabe entered, bringing with him the smell of morning air and horses. His eyes found her immediately, noting her packed bag, her posture poised for flight. "Storm's past," he said simply. "Roads will be muddy for a while, though." Emma nodded, uncertain how to navigate this strange courtesy. "Thank you for the shelter. We'll be on our way." Gabe moved to the coffee pot, pouring a cup and setting it on the table. "Breakfast first. No sense traveling hungry." Before Emma could respond, Scout trotted over to Gabe, sniffing at his boots with interest. The rancher crouched, offering his hand to the puppy palm down. Scout sniffed, then licked his fingers, tail wagging cautiously. "He's still getting his confidence back," Emma said, surprised by the puppy's boldness. "He was half-starved when I found him." Gabe scratched behind Scout's ears, earning an enthusiastic tail wag. "Good judge of character, dogs," he said, straightening. "Coffee's hot. Help yourself." Emma approached the table warily, still unused to kindness without strings attached. "I can pay something for the room." "It's not much, but—" "Not necessary," Gabe cut her off, not unkindly. "Where are you headed?" The question caught her off guard. "West," she said vaguely. "Looking for work." Gabe's eyes moved over her face, lingering briefly on the fading bruise along her jaw that she'd grown careless about hiding. "What kind of work?" "Anything honest," Emma replied, pouring herself coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "I can cook, clean, sew. Worked as a teacher for a while." "Hank could use help around here," Gabe said, leaning against the counter. "He's getting on in years. Does what he can, but the place is too much for two people these days." Emma froze, the coffee cup halfway to her lips. "Are you offering me a job?" "Room and board, plus fair wages," Gabe confirmed. "Trial basis. Week to start, then we'll see." Emma set the cup down carefully. "Why would you offer work to someone you found trespassing in your shed?" Gabe's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "Good help's hard to find in these parts. You seem capable." It wasn't the whole truth, and they both knew it. Emma looked down at Scout, who had settled at her feet, watching the exchange with bright, attentive eyes. "I'm not running from the law," she said quietly, feeling she owed him at least that much. "Didn't figure you were," Gabe replied. "Law doesn't leave marks like that." He nodded toward her jaw. Emma's hand rose automatically to the bruise, her cheeks flushing. She hadn't realized it was still so visible. "He'll come looking," she said, the admission like glass in her throat. "That's what he does." Gabe's expression hardened slightly. "Let him." The simple statement, delivered without bravado or posturing, sent an unexpected shiver down Emma's spine. Not fear, but something adjacent to hope. "I can't bring trouble to your door," she insisted. Gabe crossed to the window, looking out at the vast expanse of his ranch, mountains rising blue and distant on the horizon. "Trouble finds its way regardless. Question is whether you face it alone or not." Emma studied him, this stranger offering sanctuary with so little fanfare. "Why would you risk it? You don't know me." Gabe turned from the window, his gaze direct. "My wife, Claire, she used to say that sometimes Providence puts people in your path for a reason." A shadow crossed his features. "Been 5 years since she passed." Still believed she was right about that. The mention of his wife explained something about the emptiness Emma had sensed in the ranch house, the way the property felt both well-tended and somehow hollow. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said softly. Gabe acknowledged this with a slight nod. "Coffee's getting cold." Emma took a sip, the warmth spreading through her, chasing away some of the perpetual chill she'd carried these past months. Scout had made himself comfortable by the wood stove, apparently having already decided their fate. "1 week," she said finally, "to see if it works out." "1 week," Gabe agreed. "Hank will show you around after breakfast. He handles the cooking, you'll take on cleaning and whatever else needs doing." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One condition." Emma tensed, wariness returning. There were always conditions. "What's that?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Gabe's eyes moved to Scout, who was watching them both with alert interest. "If he trusts you, that's good enough to start. But Scout there has to approve of you staying longer. Dogs know things people don't." The unexpected condition startled a laugh from Emma, rusty from disuse. "You're letting the puppy decide?" The corner of Gabe's mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but something approaching it. "He's got good instincts. Week's end, we'll see where he stands." With that, He left, the door closing softly behind him. Emma sank into a chair, Scout immediately padding over to rest his head on her knee. She stroked his ears, considering the strange turn of events. "What do you think, Scout?" she whispered. "Is this place safe for a while?" Scout looked up at her with complete trust, his tail sweeping the floor in gentle arcs. For the first time in months, Emma allowed herself to consider the possibility of staying somewhere, of not constantly looking over her shoulder, of having more than just the clothes on her back and a puppy for company. It was terrifying. It was tempting. After breakfast, Emma met Hank, a weathered man in his 70s with a shock of white hair and hands gnarled from decades of ranch work. He showed her around the property with gruff efficiency. The main house, the barns, the corrals, the vegetable garden struggling against the autumn chill. "Boss doesn't talk much," Hank said as they walked, Scout trotting happily beside them. "Don't take it personal. Been that way since Claire passed." "How long have you worked here?" Emma asked, taking in the vast spread of the ranch. It wasn't the largest she'd seen, but it was substantial, with careful attention paid to its upkeep despite the obvious shortage of hands. "Going on 40 years, Hank replied with pride. "Worked for Gabe's father before him. Good family, honest people." He gave her a sidelong glance. "Don't get many visitors out this way, especially not ones that arrive during storms." Emma kept her eyes on the path ahead. "I'm not staying long, just until I get back on my feet." Hank snorted softly. "That's what I said too, back in '82. Just passing through, I told old man Morgan. 4 decades later, still here." He nodded toward a fenced pasture where horses grazed. "Gabe's good with broken things. Horses, fences, people. Doesn't push, just gives them space to heal." The observation was too close to the truth for comfort. Emma changed the subject. "What will my duties be?" "Main house needs attention," Hank said. "Been just us men for too long. Beyond that, whatever needs doing. Winter's coming. Plenty of work before the snow flies." By evening, Emma had cleaned the kitchen and front rooms of the main house, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple, honest labor. Scout had appointed himself her supervisor, following her movements with devoted attention and occasionally disappearing to check on Gabe's whereabouts. At dinner, the three of them sat at the large kitchen table, the silence comfortable rather than strained. Hank did most of the talking, sharing ranch stories and local gossip while Gabe occasionally nodded or asked a question. Emma contributed little, still feeling like an intruder in their established routine. After the meal, Emma insisted on washing the dishes despite Hank's protests. As she worked, she became aware of Gabe sitting at the table behind her, a ledger open before him. Scout curled at his feet as if he'd always belonged there. "He's taken to you," Emma observed, nodding toward the puppy. Gabe glanced down at Scout. "He knows he's safe here." The simple statement hung in the air between them, layered with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. "Thank you," Emma said suddenly, keeping her back to him as she dried a plate. "For today. For all of it." She heard the chair creak as Gabe shifted. "Got a feeling you haven't had much to be thankful for lately." Emma set the plate down carefully. "No," she admitted. "I haven't." "Stay," Gabe said, the words so quiet she almost missed it. "If he trusts you. If you trust yourself." Emma turned, finding Gabe watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I don't know if I can," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't have to decide tonight," Gabe replied, returning his attention to the ledger. "One day at a time." Later, alone in the bunkhouse room that had somehow become hers, Emma sat on the bed with her grandmother's Bible open in her lap, Scout curled beside her. The worn pages fell open to a passage she'd read countless times during her darkest moments. "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Emma stroked Scout's soft fur, thinking of the quiet rancher and his offer of sanctuary. 1 week. 1 chance. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Emma allowed herself to consider the possibility that tomorrow might be better than today. Outside, the Montana sky stretched vast and star-filled above Ravens Point Ranch, While inside, a woman who had lost everything but her faith and a stray puppy dared to imagine staying in one place long enough to call it home. 4 weeks at Ravens Point Ranch had passed like water through cupped hands for Emma, each day both precious and impossible to hold on to. October's chill had deepened, painting the surrounding hills with flaming colors that would soon surrender to winter's approaching grip. Standing on the porch of the main house, a basket of freshly gathered eggs balanced on her hip, Emma caught herself feeling something dangerously close to contentment. Scout had grown in the months since they'd arrived, his gangly puppy legs promising the sturdy working dog he would become. He divided his loyalties now, following Emma during her morning chores, then trotting faithfully behind Gabe in the afternoons, as the rancher checked fences and tended to the small herd of cattle that provided the ranch's modest income. "Going to snow tonight," Hank announced, joining Emma on the porch. The old man had a sixth sense about weather that Emma had quickly learned to trust. "Best finish bringing in those porch plants." Emma nodded, setting the egg basket on the small table. "I'll get to it after breakfast." She hesitated, then added, "I was thinking of making apple pie today. Found a crate of late Honeycrisps in the root cellar." Hank's weathered face split into a grin. "Been years since we had proper pie around here. Boss'll appreciate that." The casual mention of Gabe sent an unexpected warmth through Emma that had nothing to do with the morning sun. Over the past weeks, a careful friendship had formed between them, built on respect, shared work, and the gradual revelation of small truths. Nothing earth-shattering, just the slow unveiling that happens when two wounded people recognize something familiar in each other. She knew now that Gabe had inherited the ranch from his father, that he'd met Claire in college where they'd both studied agriculture, that they'd had dreams of modernizing the ranch before cancer had taken her far too young. He knew that Emma had been a schoolteacher in a small Idaho town, that she loved poetry and classical music, that Scout had been her salvation on the road. What remained unspoken was the reason she'd been on that road at all. The bruises had faded, but Gabe had never asked about them, and Emma had never offered an explanation. Some truths were still too raw to voice. Inside, Emma set about making breakfast, a routine that had somehow become hers despite Hank's initial insistence that cooking was his domain. The older man had grudgingly conceded after tasting her biscuits, declaring them almost as good as my mother's, with gruff approval. Gabe entered as she was setting the table, bringing with him the crisp scent of morning air and horses. His eyes found hers immediately, a silent good morning that had become their custom. "Hank says snow tonight," Emma said, pouring coffee into his waiting mug. "He's usually right," Gabe replied, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Need to bring the last of the hay in from the south field. Might be good to have an extra pair of hands." The invitation, for that's what it was, hung in the air between them. Emma had ventured into various parts of the ranch during her time at Ravens Point, but the south field remained unexplored. "I can help," she said, setting a plate of biscuits on the table. "After I finish the morning chores." Gabe nodded, something like satisfaction in his eyes. "We'll head out after lunch." The morning passed in comfortable routine, feeding chickens, weeding the last of the hardy vegetables in the kitchen garden, bringing in the porch plants that Hank treasured. By midday, Emma had also managed to get the pie in the oven, its sweet cinnamon scent filling the kitchen. After a quick lunch, she changed into her sturdiest clothes and met Gabe by the barn where he was hitching a team to the hay wagon. Scout bounded around them, excited by the prospect of an expedition. "Ever handled a team before?" Gabe asked as Emma approached. "No," she admitted, "but I'm a quick learner." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That you are." The drive to the south field took them along a winding dirt track that followed a small creek. The landscape opened before them, golden grasses rippling in the breeze, the distant mountains sharp against the clear blue sky. Emma breathed deeply, savoring the clean, cold air filling her lungs. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. Gabe glanced at her, then back to the horses. Different kind of beautiful in every season. Harshest in winter, but honest about it. Emma understood what he meant. There was something refreshingly direct about Montana's wilderness. It made no false promises, demanded respect, but rewarded those who persevered with moments of breathtaking beauty. "Claire's favorite spot is just ahead," Gabe said, the words clearly surprising even him as they emerged. He rarely mentioned his late wife, though her presence lingered in the careful touches throughout the ranch house. The handmade quilts, the watercolor paintings of local wildflowers, the collection of well-thumbed poetry books that Emma had discovered in the study. Emma remained quiet, allowing him the space to continue or retreat as he chose. Ridge overlooking the valley, he added after a moment. Used to ride up there at sunset. Said it was like sitting on the edge of forever. She sounds like she had a poet's soul, Emma observed gently. Gabe nodded, his hands steady on the reins. She did. Saw beauty where most just saw work. He cleared his throat. Fields just around this bend. The hay fields spread before them, the last cutting of the season neatly rolled into bales scattered across the open space. Clouds were building on the western horizon, confirming Hank's weather prediction. Storm's coming faster than I thought, Gabe observed, setting the brake on the wagon. We'll need to work quick. For the next 2 hours they labored side by side, loading hay bales onto the wagon. Emma's muscles burned with the effort, but she welcomed the honest fatigue. This was clean work, purposeful work, so different from the desperate scrambling of her months on the run. Scout appointed himself supervisor, darting around the field and occasionally attempting to help by pulling at loose strands of hay. His antics brought rare smiles to Gabe's face, easing the tension that had settled around him since mentioning Claire. As they loaded the last bale, the temperature dropped noticeably, the wind picking up. Gabe glanced at the darkening sky. We'll need to hurry. Storm's almost on us. They secured the load and climbed onto the wagon seat. Gabe clicked to the horses, urging them to a faster pace than they'd taken on the outward journey. Scout jumped up beside Emma, pressing against her as if sensing the urgency. They were halfway back to the ranch when the first snowflakes began to fall, large, wet flakes that quickly intensified. The landscape transformed around them, familiar landmarks becoming ghostly and indistinct in the swirling white, creeks running high, Gabe observed as they approached the crossing. Spring, melt, and now this. Might be trouble. Emma clutched the seat as the wagon descended toward the water. The normally placid creek had swollen with recent rains, its current pushing against the rocky crossing with determined force. Gabe assessed the situation, then handed Emma the reins. Hold these steady, don't pull, just maintain tension. Before she could question him, he'd climbed down and was walking alongside the nervous horses, speaking to them in low, calming tones as he guided them into the water. The wagon lurched as it entered the creek, the current immediately pushing against the wheels. Emma held the reins as instructed, heart pounding as water splashed over the crossing. Beside her, Scout whined anxiously. It's all right, she assured the puppy, wishing she felt as confident as she sounded. Halfway across, one of the wheels struck a submerged rock, tilting the wagon precariously. Several hay bales slid, threatening to unbalance their load completely. Without hesitation, Gabe waded deeper, pushing against the wagon to stabilize it while continuing to guide the horses. Water rose to his waist, the current battling against him as he urged the team forward. Emma held her breath until finally, with a lurch, the wagon cleared the creek and climbed the opposite bank. Gabe emerged from the water, soaked and shivering in the falling snow. You're freezing, Emma said as he climbed back onto the seat, taking the reins. We need to get back, he replied, his voice tight with cold. Storms worsening. The snowfall had become a proper blizzard, visibility shrinking to mere yards ahead. The horses plodded forward, heads lowered against the driving snow. Emma pressed closer to Gabe, trying to share what warmth she could. There, Gabe said after what seemed an eternity. The lights of the ranch appeared through the curtain of white, a beacon guiding them home. Hank was waiting in the barn, his face lined with worry. Was about to come looking, he said as they drove in. Storm hit harder than expected. Together, they quickly unhitched the team and ensured the animals were dry and fed. Gabe moved with practiced efficiency despite his sodden clothes and bluish lips. You need to get warm, Emma insisted once the horses were settled. You'll catch your death. Need to check the generator first, Gabe argued, but Hank cut him off. Already done. Now get inside before you turn into an icicle. Emma's right. To her surprise, Gabe acquiesced without further protest, perhaps too cold to argue. They made their way to the main house through snow already accumulating on the ground, Scout bounding ahead to break a path. Inside, Emma took charge. "Hot shower now," she ordered, pushing Gabe toward the hallway. "I'll make something warm to drink." He looked as if he might protest, then nodded, disappearing toward the bathroom. Emma busied herself in the kitchen, putting on water for tea and retrieving the apple pie from where it had been cooling. "Haven't seen a storm like this in October for years," Hank commented, looking out the window at the thickening snow. "Might be stuck here a few days." Emma nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of anxiety his words produced. Being snowbound meant safety in one sense. No one could reach them. But it also meant no escape if needed. Old fears died hard. When Gabe returned, his hair damp from the shower and some color restored to his face, Emma had tea and warm pie waiting. He accepted both with quiet thanks, the simple domesticity of the moment striking Emma with unexpected force. It felt like family, this shared meal in a warm kitchen while a storm raged outside. It felt like something she'd lost long ago. "You saved the wagon today," she said as they ate. "And probably the horses, too." Gabe shook his head. "Just did what needed doing." "Still," Emma persisted. "Thank you." He met her eyes then, something unspoken passing between them. "You're welcome," he said simply. That night, after Hank had retired to his room and Gabe had made a final check of the animals, Emma sat by the fireplace with Scout at her feet. The storm howled around the sturdy ranch house, but inside, all was warm and secure. Gabe joined her, settling into the adjacent armchair with a book. They sat in comfortable silence, the crackle of the fire and occasional turning of pages the only sounds. "Your trial week ended 3 weeks ago," Gabe said suddenly, his eyes still on his book. Emma's hands stilled in Scout's fur. "Yes?" she acknowledged softly. "Scout seems to have made his decision," Gabe continued, nodding toward the puppy who had stretched contentedly between them, clearly at home. "He has," Emma agreed, uncertain where this conversation was leading. Gabe closed his book, finally looking at her directly. "Have you?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with all the things neither had spoken aloud. Emma felt something crack inside her chest, not painfully, but like ice breaking on a spring creek, releasing what had been frozen beneath. "I want to stay," she admitted, the words barely audible above the storm. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" Gabe asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew. Emma stared into the fire, gathering courage. "Of bringing trouble to your door, of not being strong enough if he finds me, of—" she hesitated, "of caring about this place, about the people here." Gabe was silent for a long moment. "Fear's natural," he said finally. "Doesn't mean you let it decide for you." "It's not just my decision," Emma pointed out. "This is your home." "It is," Gabe agreed. "And I'm saying you have a place in it, for as long as you want." The simple declaration, delivered without drama or expectation, brought unexpected tears to Emma's eyes. She blinked them away, unwilling to reveal just how deeply his words had touched her. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Gabe nodded, returning to his book as if they'd been discussing nothing more significant than the weather. But something had shifted between them, a door opening just enough to let in a sliver of light. The storm lasted 3 days, sealing Raven's Point Ranch in a cocoon of white isolation. When it finally cleared, the world emerged transformed. Familiar landscapes rendered new and strange beneath the snow's blank canvas. Life settled into a different rhythm, winter chores replacing autumn's preparations. Emma found unexpected joy in the season's simple pleasures. The diamond sparkle of sunlight on fresh snow, the cozy evenings by the fire, Scout's delight in bounding through snowdrifts taller than himself. 2 weeks after the storm, Emma was in town with Hank, collecting mail and supplies. The small mountain community of Pine Creek was little more than a general store, post office, diner, and a handful of other businesses strung along a single main street. But it offered necessary connections to the outside world. "Mrs. Patterson wants to know if you're planning to attend the Thanksgiving potluck at the community hall," Hank said as they loaded supplies into the truck. "Whole town comes." "Good food, decent company." Emma hesitated. She'd managed to avoid town gatherings so far, preferring the safety of anonymity, but after nearly 2 months at Raven's Point, hiding forever seemed increasingly impractical. "I'll think about it," she promised, climbing into the truck. As Hank drove back toward the ranch, Emma sorted through the mail he'd collected. Bills, agricultural catalogs, a letter from Gabe's cousin in Idaho. At the bottom of the stack, a plain white envelope caught her attention. No return address, addressed simply to Proprietor Ravens Point Ranch. Something cold settled in Emma's stomach as she studied the envelope. The handwriting, sharp and angular with oddly spaced letters, was unmistakable. Daniel had found her. Her hands trembled as she slipped the envelope into her coat pocket before Hank could notice, her mind racing. How had he tracked her here? Had someone from her old life recognized her in town? Had he been watching all along, waiting for her to feel safe before making his move? By the time they reached the ranch, Emma had composed her features into a mask of calm, though her heart thundered in her chest. She helped unload the supplies, making excuses about needing to check on Scout to escape to the bunkhouse. Alone, she stared at the envelope for long minutes before finding the courage to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words. "Found you, Emma." The simplicity of the threat made it all the more terrifying. No elaboration needed, just the certainty that her past had caught up with her. Emma sank onto the bed, the letter clutched in her hand, as the careful peace she'd built over the past months crumbled around her. She had to leave. Tonight, while everyone slept. Pack her few belongings, take Scout, and disappear before Daniel could arrive. Before he could bring his rage to Ravens Point. Before Gabe or Hank could be hurt trying to protect her. The thought of leaving sent a physical pain through her chest, sharper than she'd expected. When had this place, these people, become so important? When had Ravens Point stopped being a temporary refuge and started feeling like home? Emma was still sitting there, torn between flight and the desperate wish to stay, when a knock sounded at her door. She hastily shoved the letter under her pillow. "Come in," she called, forcing steadiness into her voice. Gabe entered, Scout trotting happily at his heels. The puppy bounded onto the bed beside Emma, sensing her distress and pressing close. "Hank said you seemed unwell," Gabe said, his eyes assessing her with uncomfortable perception. "Said you were fine in town, then quiet on the drive back." "Just tired," Emma lied, scratching Scout's ears to avoid meeting Gabe's gaze. He remained in the doorway, unconvinced. "Emma." Something in the way he said her name, gentle but insistent, broke through her defenses. "He found me," she whispered, pulling the letter from beneath her pillow and holding it out. Gabe crossed the room and took the paper, his expression hardening as he read the 3 words. "When did this come?" "Today." "In the mail." Gabe folded the letter carefully, his movements deliberate. "You're planning to run." It wasn't a question, but Emma nodded anyway. "It's what I do. What I've been doing since I left him." "And how has that worked so far?" Gabe asked, no judgment in his tone, just quiet inquiry. Emma looked away. "I'm still alive. That's existence, not living." Gabe sat beside her on the bed, careful to maintain space between them. "Tell me about him." For a moment, Emma couldn't speak, the words trapped behind years of silence and shame. Then, like a dam breaking, the story poured out. How she'd met Daniel during her first year teaching, his charm and attentiveness, the gradual isolation from friends and family, the first time he'd struck her during an argument over dinner plans. "It got worse after we married," she continued, her voice hollow. "He controlled everything, my friends, my clothes, when I could leave the house." The school principal noticed the bruises. Tried to help. Daniel found out and... She swallowed hard. "He put me in the hospital that night. Broken ribs, dislocated shoulder. Said if I ever tried to leave, he'd kill me." Gabe listened in silence, his face impassive but for the muscle working in his jaw. "I left anyway," Emma said, finding strength in the admission. "Packed what I could carry while he was at work, emptied our savings account and just disappeared. He's been tracking me ever since, moving from town to town, always looking over my shoulder." "Until Scout," Gabe observed softly. Emma nodded, stroking the puppy's head. "Found him abandoned at a rest stop in Idaho. Couldn't leave him. Maybe that's what slowed me down enough for Daniel to catch up." "Or maybe," Gabe suggested, "Scout was the reason you finally found somewhere worth staying." The observation struck Emma silent. She'd never considered that possibility, that finding Scout had been not a liability but the catalyst that led her to Raven's Point. To safety. To Gabe. "It doesn't matter now," she said, pushing the thought away. "I have to leave before he gets here. He's dangerous, Gabe. Not just to me." "So am I," Gabe replied, his voice low and certain. "When there's something worth protecting." The simple declaration sent an unexpected shiver through Emma. "This isn't your fight. You made it my fight the moment you stepped onto my land," Gabe countered, standing. "The moment Scout decided you belonged here. I can't let you risk yourself," Emma insisted. "Or Hank. Or this place." Gabe moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered ranch. "My grandfather built this place during the Depression. My father defended it against developers who wanted to turn it into a resort. I buried my wife here." He turned back to Emma, his eyes steady. "This land has seen hardship before. It's still standing." "Daniel won't just give up," Emma warned. "Neither will I," Gabe replied simply. Emma felt tears threatening, overwhelmed by his steadfast support. "Why?" she asked, echoing a question she'd posed when they first met. "Why would you stand between me and danger?" Gabe considered her for a long moment. "Because some things are worth fighting for," he said finally. "Some people are worth protecting." The words hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to name. "Stay," Gabe said, the word both request and promise. "We face this together." Emma looked down at Scout, who gazed up at her with complete trust, then back to Gabe, whose quiet strength had become her anchor in a storm-tossed life. "All right," she whispered, taking the first step away from fear and towards something that felt dangerously like hope. Together. The morning dawned bright and bitter cold, the kind of crystalline Montana day where breath hung visible in the air and the snow squeaked underfoot. Emma moved through the quiet kitchen with practiced ease, starting coffee and mixing biscuit dough as she had every morning for the past 3 days since the letter arrived. Routine became armor, normality, a shield against the fear that lurked beneath the surface of each moment. Scout sat attentively by the back door, waiting for his morning patrol of the property. The border collie had grown in the months since Emma had found him, no longer the skinny, trembling puppy, but a sleek, confident young dog with keen eyes and boundless energy. He sensed the tension in the house, staying closer to Emma, more alert when strangers approached the ranch. "Morning!" Gabe's voice came from the doorway, startling Emma from her thoughts. He stood there in his worn flannel shirt and jeans, eyes taking in the scene with quiet appreciation. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," Emma admitted, sliding the biscuits into the oven. "Thought I'd get breakfast started." Gabe poured himself coffee, his movements unhurried despite the situation hanging over them. "Hank's checking the property boundaries again, making sure all access points are secure." Emma nodded, grateful for the practical preparations while dreading their necessity. For 3 days, they'd maintained a careful vigilance, never leaving the ranch unattended, taking inventory of weapons, ensuring vehicles were fueled and ready. Waiting. "The not knowing is the worst part," she said, voicing the thought that had kept her awake through the night. "When he'll come. How?" "Makes it hard to breathe," Gabe agreed, surprising her with his understanding. After Claire's diagnosis, there were weeks of waiting for test results, treatment options. Found myself holding my breath without realizing it. Emma looked up at him, struck by the comparison. "How did you bear it?" Gabe considered the question, his eyes finding hers across the kitchen. One moment at a time, one breath, one task. Staying present was the only way through. Emma absorbed his words, recognizing the wisdom in them. She'd spent so many months looking over her shoulder, anticipating the worst, that she'd forgotten how to inhabit the present moment fully. "I've been running so long," she admitted. "I don't know how to stand still when everything in me is screaming to flee." "Courage isn't about not feeling fear," Gabe said, his voice low and certain. "It's about feeling it and choosing your path anyway." Before Emma could respond, Scout leapt to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His attention fixed on the window, ears forward, body tense. Gabe moved to the window, peering out at the snow-covered drive. "Truck coming," he said, his voice shifting to something harder. "Not one I recognize." Emma's heart seized, her hands instinctively gripping the counter for support. "It's him," she whispered, certainty cold in her veins. Gabe turned to her, his expression resolute. "Stay here. I'll handle this." "No!" Emma straightened, drawing on a strength she hadn't known she possessed until Raven's Point. "We face this together. That's what we agreed." Something flickered in Gabe's eyes. Pride, perhaps, or respect. He nodded once. "Together, then. But let me do the talking first." They moved to the front of the house, Scout staying close to Emma's side. Through the window, they watched as a black pickup truck came to a stop in the yard. A man emerged, tall, well-dressed in a way that seemed out of place on a ranch, with dark hair and the kind of handsome features that photographed well but revealed their coldness in person. "Daniel," Emma confirmed, her voice steadier than she felt. Gabe assessed her ex-husband with a rancher's practiced eye, noting the city boots unsuited for snow, the expensive coat, the way he carried himself with entitled confidence. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, as Daniel approached the porch. The knock when it came was sharp, impatient. Gabe opened the door, filling the frame with his solid presence, Scout at his heels with hackles raised. "Can I help you?" Gabe asked, his voice neutral but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I believe you have something that belongs to me," he said smoothly. "I'm Daniel Forrester. I'm looking for my wife, Emma." "Don't know any Emma Forrester," Gabe replied evenly. Daniel's smile tightened. "She might be using her maiden name, Reynolds, Emma Reynolds. About 5'6", auburn hair." His eyes moved past Gabe, searching the interior of the house. "We had a misunderstanding, and she left rather abruptly. Family's worried sick." "This is private property," Gabe said, not moving from the doorway. "I suggest you look elsewhere." Daniel's facade of civility slipped just slightly, a flash of something ugly crossing his features before he controlled it. "I have reason to believe she's here. A reliable source in town mentioned a new woman working at Raven's Point Ranch. Matches Emma's description perfectly." Scout growled, low and warning, sensing the tension. "Nice dog," Daniel observed, his tone suggesting the opposite. "Territorial, isn't he?" "Good judge of character," Gabe replied. Daniel sighed, as if dealing with a particularly slow student. "Look, I understand your position. Emma can be very convincing. Probably told you some sob story about how badly I treated her." "Haven't heard any stories," Gabe said. "Just know you're trespassing." Daniel's patience visibly thinned. "I don't think you understand the situation. Emma is my wife. Legally, I have every right to—" "You have no rights here." Emma's voice came from behind Gabe as she stepped forward, refusing to hide any longer. Scout moved immediately to her side, pressing against her leg in silent support. "And I'm not your wife. Not anymore." Daniel's expression shifted at the sight of her, something predatory and possessive replacing the false charm. "Emma," he said, her name like ownership in his mouth. "You've led me on quite a chase." "It wasn't an invitation," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "The divorce papers were very clear. So was the restraining order." Daniel laughed, the sound chilling in its dismissiveness. "Papers you had no right to file. Agreements I never signed." "Doesn't matter," Emma said. "I'm not going back. Not ever." Daniel's eyes hardened, his attention shifting to Gabe. "I see how it is. Found yourself a replacement already. Does he know what you are, how you lie, manipulate, provoke until someone has to put you in your place?" "That's enough," Gabe said, his voice dangerously quiet. Daniel ignored him, his focus entirely on Emma now. "Did you tell him about the affairs, the money you stole, how you drove me to break my arm in 3 places?" Emma interrupted, a new strength in her voice. "To crack my ribs? To threaten to kill me if I ever left?" She shook her head. "I've told the truth, Daniel." For the first time in years. Daniel's expression darkened further. "You're coming home, Emma? Now, we'll sort this out privately, as a family should." "She's not going anywhere," Gabe stated, the words simple but absolute. Daniel assessed him with cold calculation. "This doesn't concern you." "It does now," Gabe replied. A tense silence stretched between the three of them, broken only by Scout's continuous low growl. Then Daniel stepped back, a dangerous smile playing at his lips. "I see reason isn't going to work today," he said lightly. "Fine. We'll handle this another way." He turned toward his truck, then paused. "I'll be in town for a while, at the Pine Creek Inn. When you're ready to be sensible, Emma, you know where to find me." The threat beneath the casual words was unmistakable. Emma watched as he climbed into his truck and drove away, her body rigid with tension until the vehicle disappeared down the long drive. "He'll be back," she said softly. Gabe nodded, closing the door against the cold. "Yes. He won't give up," Emma continued, her arms wrapped around herself. "That's not who he is." "Neither will we," Gabe replied, his certainty a counterweight to her fear. He led her back to the kitchen where the forgotten biscuits had begun to fill the house with their homey scent. "Sit. You're shaking." Emma sank into a chair, Scout immediately placing his head in her lap, his warm weight anchoring her to the present. Gabe poured fresh coffee, adding a splash of whiskey from a bottle in the cabinet before placing the mug in her hands. "For the nerves," he explained at her questioning look. Emma took a grateful sip, the warmth spreading through her chest. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment, "for bringing this to your door." Gabe sat across from her, his steady gaze finding hers. "You didn't bring anything, he did." "Still," Emma insisted, "you and Hank shouldn't have to deal with my problems." "That's what family does," Gabe said simply. The word family, settling between them with unexpected weight. "Carries each other's burdens." Emma looked at him, really looked, seeing the quiet strength that had become her foundation over these past months. Not the false strength of Daniel's controlling anger, but something deeper, more genuine, the kind of strength that had room for gentleness. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. Gabe acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod, then rose as Hank entered the kitchen, stamping snow from his boots. "Saw a truck leaving," the older man said, his shrewd eyes taking in the situation. "He found you then." Emma nodded, unsurprised by Hank's perception. Little escaped his notice on the ranch. "Staying at the Pine Creek Inn," Gabe informed him. "Says he'll be in town for a while." Hank snorted. "Jasper won't like having that sort of trouble at his place. I'll make some calls, let folks know to keep an eye out." The simple statement reminded Emma that she was no longer alone in her struggle. During her months on the run, she'd been isolated, vulnerable. Here at Ravens Point, she had allies. Not just Gabe and Hank, but a community that looked after its own. "We need a plan," Gabe said, taking the biscuits from the oven. "He won't wait long before making another move." "The Thanksgiving gathering," Emma realized suddenly. "The community potluck tomorrow. He'll know about it if he's asking questions in town." Gabe nodded, his expression grim. "Public place. Lots of witnesses. He might think it's safer to approach you there, where a scene would reflect badly on us." "Then I won't go," Emma decided. "I'll stay here while you and Hank attend." "And leave you alone?" Gabe shook his head. "That's exactly what he wants." "We all go," Hank suggested, pouring himself coffee. "Strength in numbers. Whole town will be there. Daniel Forrester might talk smooth, but even he won't try anything with 30 witnesses." Emma wasn't so certain, but she recognized the logic. Isolating her had always been Daniel's strategy, cutting her off from potential support, ensuring she had nowhere to turn. Perhaps the best defense was the opposite approach. "All right," she agreed finally. "We'll all go. But we stay together." Gabe's eyes met hers across the table, a silent promise passing between them. "Together," he confirmed. The rest of the day passed in tense vigilance. Gabe reinforced the locks on all doors and windows, positioning Scout's bed, where the dog could monitor both front and back entrances to the house. Hank made discreet calls to neighbors and friends in town, ensuring that word spread about the unwelcome visitor without explicitly mentioning Emma's situation. That night, Emma sat before the fireplace, her grandmother's Bible open in her lap, though she'd read the same verse 3 times without absorbing it. Her mind kept returning to Daniel's face as he'd stood on the porch, the cold calculation in his eyes, the absolute certainty that she was his to reclaim. Gabe joined her, settling into the adjacent chair with a mug of tea that he set beside her. "Should try to sleep," he suggested gently. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Emma nodded, though sleep seemed impossible. "I keep thinking about what he said. About me provoking him, manipulating him." She looked up at Gabe, vulnerability in her eyes. "What if there's some truth to it? What if I did somehow?" "Stop," Gabe interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "That's his voice in your head, not truth." "How can you be so sure?" Emma asked. "You've only known me a few months." Gabe was quiet for a moment, considering her question with the same thoughtfulness he brought to everything. "When Claire was sick," he said finally, "there were days she was in so much pain she'd lash out, say things she didn't mean, things that cut deep." Emma listened, sensing the rare gift of his sharing this painful memory. "One night, after a particularly bad day, she asked me the same question you just did. How could I be sure she was still the woman I married? How could I love someone who'd become so bitter?" His eyes found the fire, seeing something beyond the present. "I told her that pain doesn't change who we are at our core. It just strips away the protective layers until only the essential remains." He looked back at Emma, his gaze steady. "I've seen who you are, Emma. Not just when things are easy, but when you're scared, tired, pushed to your limits. I've watched how you care for Scout, how you treat Hank with respect, how you work with dignity even when tasks are menial." His voice softened. "Nothing Daniel said matches the woman I've come to know." Emma felt tears threaten, unexpected and overwhelming. "I've spent so long doubting myself," she admitted, "wondering if maybe he was right, if I deserved what happened." "No one deserves cruelty," Gabe said with quiet certainty. "Ever." The simple declaration, delivered without qualification, washed over Emma like healing rain. For years, Daniel had twisted her perception, blurred the lines between victim and perpetrator, until she could no longer trust her own judgment. Gabe's unwavering belief in her worth began to restore what had been stolen, her sense of self, her confidence in her own perceptions. "Thank you," she whispered, the words encompassing far more than gratitude for his support tonight. Gabe nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Try to rest," he said again, rising from his chair. "I'll be nearby if you need anything." Emma watched him go, the solid dependability of his presence, a stark contrast to the volatile uncertainty that had characterized her marriage. As she climbed the stairs to her room later, Scout trotting faithfully beside her, Emma found herself not only dreading tomorrow's confrontation but also, surprisingly, looking forward to standing her ground beside the people who had become her true family. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold, sunlight glinting off the snow-covered landscape. Emma dressed with particular care, choosing a simple but flattering dress she'd purchased during a trip to town with Hank weeks earlier. Not for Daniel's benefit, but for her own. A quiet statement that she was no longer the frightened woman who had fled in the night with only the clothes on her back. Gabe and Hank were waiting in the kitchen, both dressed in their best shirts, an apple pie and several side dishes prepared for the community potluck laid out on the counter. "Ready?" Gabe asked, his eyes taking in her appearance with quiet appreciation. Emma nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence. "As I'll ever be." The drive to Pine Creek was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Scout sat between Emma and Gabe in the truck's cab, his head swiveling between them as if monitoring their emotional states. The community hall was already bustling when they arrived, vehicles filling the small parking area and spilling onto adjacent streets. Inside, long tables groaned under the weight of traditional Thanksgiving dishes, the room warm with conversation and laughter. Emma felt eyes turn toward them as they entered, not with suspicion, but with the natural curiosity small communities have for their members. She had met many of these people during her time at Ravens Point, but always briefly, always keeping a careful distance. Today, with Daniel's threat looming, that distance felt both necessary and impossible to maintain. "Emma, dear," Mrs. Patterson, the postmistress, approached with a warm smile. "So glad you could join us. And you brought your famous apple pie, I hope?" "Yes, ma'am," Emma replied, surprised by the woman's familiar greeting. "Wonderful! Put it right over there with the other desserts. Now, have you met the Hendersons? They run the hardware store. Lovely people." Before Emma could protest, she found herself being introduced around the room, Gabe and Hank following at a discreet distance. The welcome was unexpectedly genuine, these people treating her not as a stranger, but as a neighbor they'd been waiting to properly meet. It was during a conversation with the local schoolteacher that Emma felt it, the prickling awareness of being watched. She turned slowly, her breath catching as she spotted Daniel standing just inside the entrance, his expression pleasant, but his eyes cold as they found her across the crowded room. Gabe was at her side instantly, his hand coming to rest lightly at the small of her back. "I see him," he said quietly. "You're not alone." Daniel made his way toward them, exchanging pleasantries with those he passed, the picture of affable charm. Emma steeled herself, Scout pressing against her legs as if sensing her distress. "Emma," Daniel greeted her, his smile not reaching his eyes. "What a lovely surprise. I was just telling Mrs. Patterson how I've been searching for my wife. She seems quite taken with you." "Ex-wife," Emma corrected firmly. "As you well know." Daniel's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "A misunderstanding we need to clear up." His gaze shifted to Gabe, dismissive. "Privately." "Anything you have to say can be said right here," Emma replied, drawing strength from Gabe's solid presence beside her. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. "Always so stubborn," he said, his tone light but with an edge that sent ice through Emma's veins. "It's what I love about you, though it does lead to misunderstandings between us." "There's no misunderstanding," Emma stated clearly. "Our marriage is over. The restraining order is valid. You need to leave me alone." Several nearby conversations had quieted as people became aware of the tension unfolding. Daniel noticed, too, his expression hardening as he realized he was losing control of the situation. "Emma," he said, his voice dropping to the dangerously soft tone she remembered from their worst arguments. "You're making a scene. Let's step outside and discuss this like rational adults." "She's not going anywhere with you," Gabe stated, his voice carrying just enough to draw additional attention. Daniel's facade cracked further, irritation flashing in his eyes. "This is a private matter between my wife and me. I suggest you step back." "Not his wife," Hank interjected, joining them with the local sheriff at his side. Lady made herself clear. Daniel assessed the growing circle of witnesses, his options narrowing. "Emma," he tried again, reaching for her arm. "You know how these small-town gossips twist things. Come with me now, and we'll sort this out." Emma stepped back from his touch, Scout growling low in his throat. "No, Daniel. Not now. Not ever." For a moment, Emma thought he might lunge for her, the mask of civility slipping to reveal the rage beneath. Then the sheriff cleared his throat, drawing Daniel's attention. "Mr. Forrester, is it?" The sheriff asked mildly. "Understand you're staying at the Pine Creek Inn." Daniel straightened, composing himself with visible effort. "That's right. Just visiting, looking for my wife." "Ex-wife," the sheriff corrected, his tone friendly but firm. "Who, as I understand it, has made her wishes clear. This being a small community, we take our neighbors' well-being seriously." Daniel's jaw tightened as he realized the trap closing around him, the entire room now watching, the sheriff's presence making any aggressive move impossible. "Fine," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Have it your way for now, Emma. But this isn't over." "Yes," Emma replied, finding a strength in her voice she hadn't known she possessed. "It is." Daniel's eyes burned with promise of retribution, but he turned and left, the door closing behind him with careful restraint that fooled no one who had witnessed the exchange. Emma released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, Gabe's hand finding hers and squeezing gently. "You did well," he murmured, pride evident in his voice. The sheriff approached them, his expression concerned. "That your ex-husband I've been hearing about?" he asked Emma, She nodded, still processing the confrontation. Yes. He has a history of violence. There's a restraining order from Idaho. I'll need the details, the sheriff said. Can stop by the ranch tomorrow to get your statement. Meanwhile, I'll have a word with our visitor about respecting local hospitality. Emma thanked him, overwhelmed by the unexpected support from this community she had only begun to know. As the tension of the moment dissipated, people returned to their conversations, though many approached to check on her, offering quiet words of encouragement or simply including her in their holiday discussions, as if she had always belonged among them. Later, as they prepared to leave, Mrs. Patterson pressed Emma's hand warmly. "You're one of us now, dear," the older woman said with simple certainty. "Whatever you need, you just ask." The drive back to Ravens Point was quiet, but without the earlier tension. Emma sat between Gabe and Hank, Scout curled at her feet, watching the snowy landscape pass by the windows. "He won't give up easily," she said finally, naming the fear that still lingered despite the day's victory. "No," Gabe agreed, his eyes on the road, "but neither will we." The simple promise warmed Emma more than any elaborate declaration could have. As the truck turned onto the ranch drive, the familiar buildings appearing through the gathering dusk, she felt something shift within her. Not the dissolution of fear, but the growth of something stronger alongside it. Courage, perhaps, or hope. That night, after Hank had retired and Scout was curled by the fire, Emma found Gabe on the porch, watching stars emerge in the clear night sky. "Thank you," she said, joining him at the railing. "For today, for everything." Gabe turned to her, his face softened by moonlight. "No need for thanks." "There is," Emma insisted gently. "You gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go, believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself." Gabe was quiet for a moment, his eyes returning to the stars. "You know," he said finally, "when Claire died, I thought that was it for me. Figured I'd just keep going through the motions until it was my time. Then one stormy night, I found someone sleeping in my shed with a puppy and a Bible." Emma smiled at the memory, seeing it now through his eyes. "And you said stay if he trusts you first." "Scout's a good judge of character," Gabe replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Recognized what I was too cautious to admit." "What's that?" Emma asked, her heart quickening. Gabe turned to her fully then, his expression open in a way she'd rarely seen. "That sometimes life gives you a second chance at happiness, if you're brave enough to take it." The words hung in the cold night air between them. An invitation rather than a demand. A possibility rather than a presumption. Emma thought of the frightened woman she had been months ago, hiding in a shed with nothing but a puppy and a worn Bible to her name. Thought of all the small moments since then. Gabe teaching Scout to herd, his patient hands guiding the enthusiastic puppy. Quiet evenings by the fire discussing books. The way he'd stood beside her today, solid as the mountains that framed Ravens Point. "I'd like to be brave," she whispered, stepping closer to him. "I'd like to stay, not just for a week or a month, but for as long as you want," Gabe finished, his voice gentle but certain. "This is your home now, Emma? If you choose it." Emma looked up at the man before her, then out at the ranch that had become her sanctuary. In the distance, the mountains stood sentinel against the night sky, eternal and unchanging. Below them, the ranch buildings nestled in the valley, lights glowing against the darkness. Home, she thought. After so long running, the word felt almost foreign, yet perfectly right. "I choose it," she said simply. "I choose to stay." Gabe's smile then was like sunrise after the longest night, full of promise and new beginnings. He opened his arms, and Emma stepped into his embrace, feeling for the first time in years the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Inside, Scout barked once as if in approval, and Emma laughed, the sound carrying across the snow-covered ranch. Not the nervous laugh of someone afraid, but the joyful sound of a woman who had finally found her way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.